Imagine standing on the edge of a world not yet fully understood, a world where dragons still decorated maps, the stars were as mysterious as the oceans, and truth was often dictated by tradition rather than proven by fact. Now imagine living in a time when that world began to change. A time when curiosity started to challenge authority, when explorers dared to sail into the unknown, when scientists questioned what had always been believed, and when ordinary people began to read, think, and dream in new ways. This was the Tudor era. While the Tudors are often remembered for their grand castles, dramatic monarchs, and turbulent politics, their most powerful legacy lies beyond the crown. It lives in the questions they asked, the risks they took, and the discoveries they made. From the workshop of William Gilbert, where he uncovered the secrets of magnetism, to the writings of Francis Bacon, who reshaped the way we think about knowledge itself, the Tudor period was a crucible of innovation. Their age sparked a movement that would help ignite the scientific revolution, shape the modern world, and remind us even today that the desire to know, to truly understand, is one of humanity's greatest strengths. This is not just a story of kings and queens. It is a story of thinkers, sailors, surgeons, and scholars. It is a story of curiosity, restless, relentless, and revolutionary. And in many ways, it is a story that is still unfolding. The Tudors remain one of the most iconic dynasties in British history, renowned not only for their political impact and colorful court dramas but also for the cultural and intellectual shifts that their era inspired. Though their reign is often remembered for the grandeur of Henry VIII's 6 marriages or Elizabeth I's firm leadership during the Spanish Armada, the true legacy of the Tudors extends far beyond the monarchy itself. Their rule heralded an age of discovery, inquiry, and practical progress. This period saw England move toward a new intellectual awakening, one that began shaping modern scientific and exploratory methods. From the early sparks of humanist thinking to the foundations of later scientific institutions and the practical knowledge they encouraged, particularly in fields such as cartography and navigation, the Tudors fostered a broader cultural transformation that laid the groundwork for the Enlightenment and beyond. The Tudor period began with Henry VII, a king often overshadowed by his more flamboyant descendants, yet instrumental in establishing a sense of order and stability after the bloody turmoil of the Wars of the Roses. This newfound stability was essential in nurturing the environment where intellectual and cultural development could thrive. Henry VII's reign marked the beginning of a subtle but significant shift in values. His court, though frugal and politically cautious, was not indifferent to learning. He recognized the importance of maintaining diplomatic relations and accumulating knowledge, especially regarding trade and foreign territories. In this pursuit, he quietly supported initiatives that indirectly encouraged intellectual curiosity. He backed John Cabot's voyage in 1497, which laid the groundwork for England's engagement in global exploration, a sign that even at this early stage, the Tudors were aware of the importance of practical knowledge, such as navigation and geography. His son, Henry VIII, dramatically intensified the crown's involvement in intellectual and religious matters. Though best remembered for his personal life and the seismic religious reforms that led to the English Reformation, Henry VIII was a well-educated monarch deeply interested in theology, music, and the humanist currents of the time. He maintained a scholarly court and supported figures such as Erasmus and Thomas More. The dissolution of the monasteries, while devastating in many respects, inadvertently released significant volumes of manuscripts and books into broader circulation, where they could be accessed and studied by scholars and lay people. This process, chaotic and destructive though it may have been, contributed to the democratization of learning and shifted the focus away from cloistered religious knowledge toward more secular and varied intellectual pursuits. In addition to religious and classical learning, the Tudor period saw a deepening interest in practical knowledge that had tangible benefits for England's economic and political power. Nowhere was this more evident than in the realms of navigation and cartography. As Europe entered the age of exploration, the Tudors understood the strategic importance of knowing and controlling the seas. The increasing availability of printed maps, translated travelogues, and geographical treatises helped disseminate new ideas and perspectives. Explorers such as Sir Francis Drake and Sir John Hawkins, though often driven by profit and political gain, also contributed to the growing pool of navigational knowledge that would become indispensable for England's later imperial ambitions. Under Elizabeth I, maritime education and the study of navigation received greater institutional support. This era saw the rise of sea captains who were not only adventurers but also collectors of data, observers of currents, stars and coastlines, and contributors to England's growing reputation as a naval power. Behind the scenes of these exploratory achievements was a burgeoning interest in understanding the natural world in a methodical, empirical manner. The Tudor period was not yet the age of full scientific revolution, but the seeds were being sown. The intellectual climate of the Renaissance, with its emphasis on observation, inquiry, and the revisiting of classical texts, found fertile ground in England. Grammar schools and universities, especially Oxford and Cambridge, began to expand their curricula to include subjects like mathematics and astronomy, although still within a religious framework. Nevertheless, this shift toward more diverse academic interests helped cultivate a generation of thinkers who would later support and participate in more formal scientific institutions. One such institution, the Royal Society of London, though officially founded after the Tudor era in 1660 during the reign of Charles II, was nonetheless a product of the intellectual momentum set in motion during the Tudor centuries. Figures like Francis Bacon, often considered a philosophical godfather of the Royal Society, were themselves shaped by the intellectual environment of late Tudor and early Stuart England. Bacon's emphasis on empirical observation and inductive reasoning was a direct challenge to the scholasticism that had long dominated intellectual life. His work was deeply rooted in the Tudor tradition of valuing practical knowledge, and he advocated for scientific investigation as a means of improving human life, a view that would find institutional expression in the Royal Society. The Tudor monarchs, especially Elizabeth I, understood the political value of aligning themselves with learning and the arts. Her court became a haven for poets, dramatists, and thinkers, creating an atmosphere in which cultural achievement was not only admired but rewarded. This patronage helped elevate intellectual activity to a matter of national pride. The Tudor state did not always lead these efforts, but it consistently facilitated them, either through direct sponsorship or by creating the conditions, stability, prosperity, and national ambition that allowed them to flourish. The emergence of English as a literary language also played a role in this broader intellectual awakening. During the Tudor period, especially under Elizabeth I, the English language began to be seen as a worthy vehicle for scholarly and literary expression. This was a crucial step in making knowledge more accessible to a wider audience. Writers like Shakespeare, Spenser, and Marlowe did not merely entertain, they explored political philosophy, human psychology, and moral dilemmas, weaving intellectual inquiry into the very fabric of popular culture. Although this was not science in the modern sense, it reflected a growing public appetite for complex, nuanced thought, an essential component of any society moving toward modernity. In tandem with these cultural and literary developments was the practical expansion of the Tudor state's knowledge infrastructure. The development of more accurate maps, for instance, was not only a boon for navigation but also for governance. Knowing the lay of the land enabled better administration, taxation, and defense. This interest in empirical geography based on actual measurements and first-hand reports distinguished the Tudors from earlier medieval rulers, whose maps were often symbolic or religious in nature. The Tudors wanted usable knowledge, and they were willing to invest in the instruments and institutions necessary to obtain it. Printing, a relatively recent innovation when Henry VII came to the throne, played a critical role in all of this. The rapid dissemination of books allowed new ideas, whether scientific, philosophical, or navigational, to spread with unprecedented speed. Tudor England became increasingly literate, especially among the merchant and middle classes, creating a more informed and engaged public. The printing press enabled the cross-pollination of ideas from across Europe, fostering a cosmopolitan intellectual environment even in a politically insular nation. Although not all Tudor-era knowledge-seeking was progressive by modern standards, alchemy, astrology, and other pseudoscience were still widely practiced. What mattered was the growing appetite for investigation. The line between magic and science, between religion and empiricism, was still blurred, but it was being contested. The Tudor embrace of exploration, their encouragement of practical disciplines, and their tentative steps toward institutionalizing learning laid the bedrock for the more formal scientific revolutions of the 17th century. The legacy of the Tudors, therefore, is not confined to the corridors of Hampton Court or the annals of dynastic intrigue. Their true monument lies in the intellectual pathways they helped open, the journey from monarchy to modern statehood, from cloistered monasteries to public libraries, from flat medieval maps to detailed nautical charts, and from passive acceptance of ancient authority to an active questioning of the natural world. In fostering exploration, supporting practical disciplines like navigation and cartography, and encouraging the growth of a literate, curious public, the Tudors helped set the course for a more knowledgeable, connected, and capable England. The enduring impact of these developments is perhaps best seen in the spirit of institutions like the Royal Society of London. Though formally established after the Tudor era, its roots run deep into the intellectual soil the Tudors helped cultivate. That such a body could emerge, dedicated to the empirical investigation of the world, speaks volumes about the transformations of the preceding century. The Tudor dynasty may have ruled with absolute authority, but their reign unwittingly empowered a future in which knowledge would no longer flow solely from the crown but from the collective, inquisitive minds of the people. Their rule, often autocratic in structure, paradoxically enabled the birth of more democratic forms of knowledge. In nurturing curiosity, be it in books, maps, stars, or seas, the Tudors left behind a legacy that far transcended royal lineage, a legacy of progress. During the Tudor dynasty, a profound transformation took root across England, a transformation that went far beyond politics, religion, and royal intrigue. This period laid the foundation for modern science through the encouragement of inquiry, empirical research, and intellectual exploration. While the scientific revolution is most commonly associated with the 17th century, many of its key ideas were cultivated during the Tudor reign. Among the many contributors to this new spirit of discovery, two towering figures stand out: Sir Francis Bacon and William Gilbert. These men exemplified the shift from reliance on classical authority to a bold embrace of observation and experimentation. Their pioneering work in scientific thinking and natural philosophy marked a turning point not only in English intellectual history but in the broader evolution of scientific reasoning. The Tudor era, through its political, educational, and cultural structures, provided a critical environment in which such figures could flourish. The story of the Tudors and their scientific champions is, therefore, not simply a tale of individual genius, it is a narrative of a society beginning to recognize the value of systematic knowledge. Sir Francis Bacon emerged in the late Tudor and early Stuart period, but his intellectual development was rooted deeply in the Tudor environment. Born in 1561 during the reign of Elizabeth I, Bacon was a product of the educational and cultural initiatives championed by the Tudors. He was educated at Trinity College, Cambridge, one of the crown jewels of English academia, where he was exposed to both classical texts and the early stirrings of Renaissance humanism. However, even as a young man, Bacon found the Aristotelian methods taught at the university stifling and inadequate for explaining the complexities of the natural world. It was this dissatisfaction that drove him to develop what would later be known as the scientific method, a rigorous process of observation, hypothesis, experimentation, and conclusion. Bacon's most famous works, such as Novum Organum, laid out his vision for a new approach to acquiring knowledge. He argued that science should be built on a foundation of empirical evidence, not on inherited dogma. Unlike the scholasticism that dominated medieval universities, which emphasized the authority of ancient texts, Bacon insisted that knowledge must be derived from experience and inductive reasoning. He believed that nature could only be understood by observing it systematically and drawing conclusions based on repeated experiments. This emphasis on method over authority was revolutionary for its time and would eventually serve as the philosophical cornerstone of the scientific revolution. Bacon also promoted the idea that science should serve practical ends. He envisioned a world in which empirical knowledge could be used to improve human life by mastering nature. This belief was not purely theoretical, it was deeply pragmatic and aligned with the Tudor state's growing interest in applied knowledge, especially in areas such as agriculture, navigation, engineering, and medicine. Bacon's vision included the establishment of institutions for collaborative scientific work, a vision realized decades later with the foundation of the Royal Society, an organization that claimed Bacon as one of its intellectual forebears. Though the society was founded after the Tudors had passed from the throne, its philosophical roots lay in the seeds Bacon planted during their reign. William Gilbert was another pioneering figure whose scientific contributions underscored the intellectual vitality of Tudor England. Born in 1544 during the reign of Henry VIII, Gilbert would grow to become one of the most respected physicians and natural philosophers of his time. Like Bacon, Gilbert was educated at Cambridge and later practiced medicine in London. However, it was his work in the field of magnetism that would secure his place in the history of science. His landmark book De Magnete, published in 1600, was the first major work of experimental physics written in England and one of the first to treat natural phenomena with a truly empirical methodology. In De Magnete, Gilbert did not merely describe the properties of magnets. He proposed that the Earth itself was a giant magnet. This was a radical and groundbreaking hypothesis that challenged traditional cosmological theories. It helped explain why compasses worked and laid the foundation for the science of geomagnetism. Gilbert's approach was methodical and based on observation and experimentation. He constructed his own instruments, performed tests, and drew conclusions from what he observed, rather than relying on inherited authorities. His rejection of the prevailing Aristotelian cosmology in favor of a theory grounded in observable facts mirrored the epistemological shift that Bacon would later codify into a method. The Tudor court played a significant role in enabling the work of thinkers like Gilbert and Bacon. Elizabeth I, in particular, maintained a court that valued education, debate, and inquiry. Her reign was marked by a flourishing of the arts and sciences, and she was known to encourage scholarly endeavors among her courtiers and advisors. Elizabeth appointed Gilbert as her personal physician, a position of prestige and influence. This role not only validated Gilbert's scientific credibility but also gave him the resources and social standing to pursue his research without fear of persecution or marginalization. The court's support provided a critical layer of protection and recognition that allowed intellectuals to challenge traditional views and venture into controversial or untested theories. The Tudor state's broader encouragement of education and literacy also played a crucial part in nurturing a generation of thinkers capable of advancing scientific knowledge. The expansion of grammar schools, the strengthening of universities, and the establishment of printing presses made new knowledge more widely available and allowed for more rapid dissemination of ideas. Books like De Magnete could now reach a far larger audience than would have been possible in earlier centuries. Similarly, Bacon's works could be read and debated across Europe, spreading the influence of his method and vision far beyond England's borders. The Tudor embrace of printing and learning thus contributed directly to the conditions necessary for scientific advancement. Moreover, the Tudors' growing interest in exploration and maritime power also created a demand for better understanding of the natural world. Navigators required improved maps, more accurate compasses, and deeper knowledge of tides, stars, and geography. These practical needs incentivized scientific inquiry. Figures like Gilbert, whose work on magnetism had direct implications for navigation, found their research to be of national importance. This utilitarian view of science where knowledge could directly serve the state aligned perfectly with the Tudor monarchy's desire to project power and compete with continental rivals like Spain and Portugal. Even religious upheaval during the Tudor era, though destructive in many ways, paradoxically contributed to scientific inquiry. The Reformation and the dissolution of the monasteries led to the dispersal of scholarly texts and the breaking of the intellectual monopoly once held by the Catholic Church. With religious authority fragmented, there was greater space for independent inquiry and debate. The questioning of religious orthodoxy created a broader cultural habit of skepticism and re-evaluation habits that also underpinned the scientific attitude. The environment of contested ideas, where authority was no longer taken for granted, mirrored the emerging scientific method's demand for verification and evidence. The synergy between the Tudors' political aims and scientific progress was not always conscious or deliberate, but it was effective. The monarchs sought power, stability, and prestige. The scholars sought knowledge and truth. In their respective quests they enabled each other. The state's need for practical solutions created a receptive audience for scientific inquiry, while the thinkers' contributions in turn strengthened the state's capabilities. It was a reciprocal relationship that yielded enduring results. Bacon and Gilbert were not isolated figures. They were part of a broader movement of inquiry and exploration that characterized the Tudor age. The court may not have fully understood or endorsed every aspect of their work, but it tolerated, funded, and often celebrated their achievements. The growing influence of such figures marked the beginning of a cultural transformation in which intellectual authority shifted away from the ancient and the abstract toward the empirical and the demonstrable. It was this change, this realignment of values that set the stage for the full flowering of science in the following century. The Tudor period, therefore, was not merely a prelude to the scientific revolution. It was an essential phase in the gestation of modern science. It was during this time that the conditions for scientific inquiry were first established in England, conditions of relative political stability, expanding education, increasing literacy, and royal patronage of learning. In this fertile ground, figures like Bacon and Gilbert could propose bold new ideas, conduct experiments, publish findings, and influence others. They helped to redefine what it meant to know something and what it meant to prove it. The transformation of knowledge that took place during this time did not happen overnight, nor was it without resistance. Many old ideas persisted, and many new ones were met with skepticism. But the trend was clear. The future belonged to those who could observe, test, and demonstrate. The Tudor champions of science laid the intellectual foundations upon which modern science would be built. Their legacy is not only in the books they wrote or the experiments they conducted, but in the new ways of thinking they introduced, ways that would empower future generations to understand, shape, and transform the world around them. Through the quiet encouragement of scholarship, the appointment of scientific advisors, and the promotion of practical learning, the Tudor monarchy inadvertently created a world where science could thrive. Figures like Bacon and Gilbert are enduring symbols of this transformation, men who looked beyond tradition and dared to seek truth through reason, evidence, and experimentation. Their lives and work exemplify the deeper legacy of the Tudor age, a legacy not confined to thrones and titles, but one etched into the very structure of how humanity understands the universe. The Tudors may have ruled with royal might, but their greatest champions wielded a power even more enduring, the power of the mind in pursuit of knowledge. The Tudor era is often remembered for its dynastic drama, powerful monarchs, and sweeping religious changes, but another vital aspect of the time is frequently overlooked: the significant strides made in medicine and health. While Tudor medicine was still deeply rooted in medieval traditions and limited by the lack of scientific understanding that modern medicine relies upon today, the period was marked by notable advancements. These included the establishment and reform of hospitals, evolving surgical techniques, a growing emphasis on public health and hygiene, and the gradual shift toward more empirical medical practices. These changes reflected broader shifts in intellectual thought, the influence of the Renaissance, and the practical needs of a growing urban population. As such, the Tudor period laid important groundwork for future medical progress, representing a time when the ancient traditions of Galen and Hippocrates began to give way to more observational, trial-based approaches. In the early Tudor period, medicine remained heavily influenced by the ancient teachings of Galen and Hippocrates, both of whom emphasized the theory of the four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. This framework held that illness was caused by imbalances in these bodily fluids, a belief that had dominated medical thinking for over a millennium. Treatments were aimed at restoring balance, and common methods included bloodletting, purging, and the use of herbal remedies. While this understanding now seems primitive, it provided a coherent system within which physicians worked, and many treatments did have some beneficial effects, even if by coincidence or placebo. However, during the Tudor period, new ideas began to challenge these ancient doctrines. The Renaissance sparked a revival of interest in the human body, prompting a greater focus on anatomy and the structure of organs. One of the most important shifts in this era was the increased emphasis on dissection. For centuries, the dissection of human corpses had been rare, largely due to religious prohibitions and social taboos. But Tudor physicians and anatomists, particularly under the influence of Renaissance humanism, began to see the value in studying the body directly. This change allowed for a more accurate understanding of internal anatomy and slowly began to displace the inaccuracies that had persisted for centuries due to over-reliance on classical texts. Perhaps no figure symbolizes this shift more than Andreas Vesalius, a Flemish anatomist whose work was influential in Tudor England despite being based in continental Europe. His seminal text, De Humani Corporis Fabric, published in 1543, provided meticulously detailed drawings of the human body based on direct observation. English physicians studied his work, and his influence marked a turn toward empirical observation in medicine. While Vesalius was not English, his ideas permeated Tudor academic and medical circles, inspiring more local dissections and a growing respect for anatomical accuracy. Hospitals during the Tudor era also underwent substantial transformation. In medieval England, hospitals were primarily religious institutions operated by monasteries and focused more on spiritual well-being than on curing disease. Patients were often cared for with prayers and basic sustenance rather than any serious medical intervention. However, the dissolution of the monasteries under Henry VIII between 1536 and 1541 caused a massive disruption in hospital care. As religious houses were closed and their lands seized, many hospitals disappeared or lost their funding. This created a crisis in public health that the Tudor state was forced to address. In the wake of this upheaval, a new kind of hospital began to emerge: secular, civic institutions aimed at practical medical care. One of the most notable examples was St. Bartholomew's Hospital in London, which survived the monastic purge and evolved into a more medically oriented institution. With funding from the Crown and the city, it began to employ physicians and surgeons more regularly, signaling a shift toward hospitals as centers of healing rather than religious reflection. This development was critical in laying the foundation for the modern hospital system. By the end of the Tudor period, hospitals were increasingly seen as places where the sick could receive organized, professional care rather than simply a spiritual send-off. Surgical advancements during the Tudor era were also significant, though surgery remained a dangerous and painful endeavor. The Tudor period saw the emergence of barber surgeons, tradesmen who combined hair cutting with surgical procedures such as tooth extractions, bloodletting, and amputations. Surgery was not yet a profession for university-trained physicians but was instead a hands-on craft practiced by skilled artisans. Despite this, Tudor surgeons developed increasingly refined techniques. The use of cauterization to stop bleeding became more common, and surgical instruments grew more specialized and effective. One of the more notable surgeons of the Tudor period was Thomas Vicary, who served as the surgeon to Henry VIII and played a crucial role in promoting the study of anatomy in England. He helped establish the Company of Barber Surgeons in 1540, a professional guild that regulated surgical practice and encouraged anatomical learning. This organization was significant because it formalized surgical training and promoted the sharing of knowledge among practitioners, further distinguishing surgery as a skilled and semi-professional field. In addition to formal advancements in medicine and surgery, the Tudor era also saw the rise of new medical practices among both professionals and lay people. Herbal medicine, for example, flourished during this time. Many people still relied on traditional remedies derived from plants, and herbal books describing the properties of various plants and their uses became increasingly popular. Notable among these was the work of John Gerard, whose Herbal or General History of Plants, published in 1597, provided detailed descriptions of hundreds of plants along with illustrations and medicinal uses. Gerard's work represented a bridge between ancient knowledge and newer observational science, compiling traditional remedies while also applying more rigorous standards of classification and utility. The Tudor period also witnessed the slow but significant emergence of empirical medicine treatment based on observation and experience rather than purely on received wisdom. Physicians and apothecaries began to keep more detailed records of symptoms, outcomes, and the effectiveness of treatments. This practice did not yet constitute clinical trials as we understand them today, but it marked an early step toward evidence-based medicine. This shift was partially driven by the changing attitudes of educated physicians, many of whom were now exposed to Renaissance humanist ideals that emphasized direct observation and skeptical inquiry. Another important development in Tudor health was a growing awareness of hygiene and its relationship to disease, although the mechanisms of infection and transmission were not yet understood. The period experienced several devastating outbreaks of plague and other infectious diseases, such as the sweating sickness, which caused panic and prompted basic public health responses. Authorities began to implement quarantine measures, isolate the sick, and clean public spaces. In London, local governments issued regulations to remove waste from the streets, enforce the cleanliness of markets, and close bathhouses suspected of spreading disease. Although germ theory was centuries away, these measures reflected a developing understanding that cleanliness played a role in preventing illness. Personal hygiene also began to gain importance. While daily bathing was uncommon due to fears that warm water opened the pores to disease, people became more concerned with cleanliness in clothing and surroundings. Perfumes, scented waters, and linen changes became more common, especially among the wealthy. These changes were not just about vanity, they represented a growing, if limited, awareness of the link between environment and health. Women also played a critical role in Tudor healthcare, often acting as caregivers and healers within their communities. Female practitioners such as midwives and herbalists provided vital services, particularly in childbirth and minor illnesses. Although they lacked formal education and recognition from medical institutions, their knowledge was based on generations of practical experience and often proved highly effective. Some women gained reputations that extended beyond their villages, and their inclusion in the broader medical ecosystem underscored the collaborative and diverse nature of Tudor medicine. Medical licensing and regulation also began to take shape during this period. The Royal College of Physicians was founded in 1518 by royal charter from Henry VIII. This body was charged with overseeing the practice of medicine in London and gradually extended its influence throughout England. It sought to standardize medical education, root out charlatans, and ensure that only qualified individuals could practice medicine. Although its reach was initially limited, the establishment of such an institution marked a crucial step toward the professionalization of medical practice. These various advancements, reform of hospitals, progress in surgery, development of new medical texts and practices, and the first steps toward organized public health formed a dynamic and evolving landscape. The Tudor period was one of experimentation, transition, and gradual improvement in the field of medicine. The influence of the Renaissance, the growth of cities, the demands of state building, and the expansion of knowledge all played a part in pushing medicine beyond its medieval roots. What is particularly remarkable about this time is the coexistence of tradition and innovation. Bloodletting and herbal poultices persisted even as anatomical dissection and surgical instruments grew more sophisticated. Superstition lived alongside observation. While the full scientific understanding of disease would not emerge until much later, the Tudor period represents the crucial moment when medicine began to turn toward reason, evidence, and professionalism. It was a time when healing began to shift from an act of faith to a process of inquiry. The medical landscape of the Tudor era was far from perfect. Mortality rates remained high, life expectancy was low, and outbreaks of disease could devastate entire communities. Yet it was also a time of progress, when people began to ask new questions, adopt new methods, and lay the groundwork for modern medicine. From the reform of hospitals to the early embrace of hygiene, from improved surgical techniques to the beginnings of empirical practice, the Tudors' contributions to health and medicine were both foundational and transformative. In reflecting on the medical achievements of the Tudor era, it becomes clear that this was a period of beginnings. The scientific tools and theories that would revolutionize medicine in the centuries to come had not yet fully emerged, but the intellectual and institutional structures necessary for their development were taking shape. Medicine, once dominated by dogma and mysticism, was beginning its long journey toward the discipline we recognize today. That journey, in many ways, began in the shadow of the Tudor crown. The Tudor dynasty is often celebrated for its charismatic monarchs, intense religious reformations, and artistic flourishing. However, beyond the towering figures of Henry VIII and Elizabeth I and the political shifts they orchestrated, the Tudor period was equally notable for the profound and lasting impact it had on the everyday lives of ordinary people. In many respects, the Tudor age marked the beginning of modernity in England. Advances in technology, infrastructure, and knowledge dissemination reshaped how people navigated the world, interacted with information, waged war, and lived from day to day. These changes did not merely touch the elite but filtered down into the lives of tradesmen, sailors, artisans, and farmers, altering the very structure of English society. One of the most striking areas of Tudor innovation was in navigation and shipbuilding. During this period, England began to emerge as a serious maritime power, propelled by the Tudor monarchy's support for exploration and naval strength. This maritime ambition required new kinds of ships faster, stronger, and capable of longer voyages. The shift from the medieval cog to the more advanced caravel and galleon allowed English explorers to journey further afield, establishing trade routes and laying the groundwork for empire. The galleon, in particular, revolutionized naval design. Its sleeker frame and multiple masts allowed for better maneuverability and speed, making it suitable for both combat and exploration. The development of navigational tools and techniques also advanced significantly during the Tudor period. Mariners began to rely on improved versions of the astrolabe and cross-staff to measure the altitude of celestial bodies and determine latitude at sea. The introduction of more accurate compasses helped sailors maintain their bearings over long distances. These tools, though relatively rudimentary by today's standards, gave English seafarers a considerable edge and made previously treacherous voyages more predictable and less perilous. Cartography improved as well, with explorers returning from their voyages with increasingly detailed and accurate maps. These developments did not exist in isolation. They were the product of collaboration between seamen, mathematicians, craftsmen, and royal patrons. The monarchy played a significant role in encouraging these maritime advances. Henry VII, for instance, sponsored John Cabot's voyages to the New World, while Elizabeth I famously supported figures like Francis Drake and Walter Raleigh. These ventures were not merely exercises in curiosity, they were calculated efforts to expand England's economic and political reach. The resulting boom in trade and exploration had tangible effects on everyday life. Foreign goods such as sugar, spices, and tobacco began to appear in English markets, albeit mostly for the wealthy at first. Nonetheless, the expanding global outlook changed the consumer landscape and introduced the notion of a connected world, a concept previously unimaginable to many. Shipbuilding innovations also had social and economic consequences at home. The construction of fleets required a large and skilled labor force, leading to the growth of port towns and shipyards, particularly in places like Deptford and Chatham. Carpenters, rope makers, sailmakers, and metal workers found new opportunities for employment, which in turn stimulated local economies. Towns along the coast became hubs of industry, commerce, and innovation, drawing in people from rural areas and gradually shifting the balance of population and labor. Another revolutionary Tudor contribution was the spread of the printing press. While the printing press had been introduced to England by William Caxton in the late 15th century, it was during the Tudor period that printing became a fully embedded part of English society. The technology revolutionized the way information was produced and shared, making books, pamphlets, and eventually newspapers more accessible than ever before. For centuries, knowledge had been the preserve of the clergy and aristocracy, locked away in manuscript form in monastic libraries. Printing changed this dynamic dramatically. By standardizing texts and reducing the cost of book production, the printing press facilitated the spread of literacy and education. Schools became more effective because they could rely on printed textbooks. Religious reformers used printed materials to reach a broader audience, particularly during the Reformation. One of the most influential examples was the widespread distribution of the Bible in English, first under Henry VIII and later under Edward VI and Elizabeth I. For the first time, ordinary people could read the scriptures for themselves, profoundly affecting their spiritual lives and their view of authority. The proliferation of printed material also encouraged critical thinking and debate. People could read not only religious tracts but also works of history, philosophy, science, and political theory. Printers became gatekeepers of information, and a growing reading public created demand for a variety of genres. This shift was not limited to the elite. Even tradesmen and small merchants began to acquire books and develop opinions on the issues of the day. Printing thus helped to cultivate a more informed and participatory society. It also laid the groundwork for future political and scientific revolutions by spreading new ideas quickly and efficiently. While the printing press empowered the population intellectually, another Tudor innovation altered the very nature of warfare and, by extension, the security and organization of daily life: gunpowder. Although gunpowder had been known in Europe since the late Middle Ages, its use became more refined and widespread during the Tudor period. Cannons, arquebus, and later muskets began to replace traditional medieval weapons such as swords, longbows, and pikes. The rise of gunpowder weaponry changed how wars were fought, leading to more destructive sieges and battlefield engagements. For the average person, this had several implications. Firstly, it meant that conflicts could be more devastating, with entire towns sometimes laid waste by artillery. Secondly, it changed the makeup of armies. Where once war had been largely the domain of knights and heavily armored elites, now infantrymen wielding firearms became more important. This democratization of warfare, while limited, opened new roles for lower-class men within the military. It also led to the professionalization of armies, as operating firearms required training and coordination. The result was a gradual shift towards state-organized military forces, setting the stage for the standing armies of later centuries. The impact of gunpowder was not confined to the battlefield. The presence of cannon on ships reinforced England's growing naval supremacy, allowing Tudor vessels to protect trade routes and assert dominance over rivals. The psychological effect of gunpowder weaponry was also considerable. The thunderous roar of cannons and guns signaled the arrival of a new age, one in which traditional forms of power and defense had to adapt or become obsolete. Beyond technological and military changes, the Tudor period also brought important innovations to the daily lives of ordinary people in terms of infrastructure, food, clothing, and domestic life. The growth of trade, supported by better ships and expanding markets, meant that more goods were available in towns and villages. Markets became more diverse and dynamic, featuring products like imported fabrics, spices, and refined metals. Although such goods were initially luxuries, over time their prices fell and their availability increased, gradually becoming part of middle-class and even lower-class life. Housing also began to evolve during the Tudor period. The classic image of the black and white timber-framed house originates from this time. For those who could afford it, homes became more comfortable, featuring glass windows, chimneys, and separate rooms for sleeping and cooking. Chimneys were especially transformative, replacing central hearths and making homes cleaner, warmer, and safer. This had the further effect of changing domestic routines and how families interacted within their living spaces. In rural areas, agricultural practices began to shift as well. The enclosure movement, while controversial and often disruptive, led to more efficient land use and farming methods. Enclosed fields allowed for better control over crops and livestock, and this in turn improved food production. Though this process displaced many peasants and created social tensions, it also pushed others toward towns and cities, where new opportunities awaited in trades, industry, and service work. Urbanization increased, bringing people into closer contact with technological and cultural developments. Tudor laws and institutions also impacted daily life. The Poor Laws, for example, reflected a growing sense of responsibility for social welfare, albeit a limited and moralizing one. These laws required local parishes to care for their poor, helping to form the basis of later welfare systems. Regulations around apprenticeships, markets, weights and measures, and sanitation contributed to a more structured and predictable society. People had clearer expectations about work, trade, and community responsibilities, and the state became more involved in ensuring a certain level of order and fairness. Entertainment and culture, too, were transformed during this time. The growth of printed material meant that ballads, plays, and news could reach wide audiences. The rise of public theaters, culminating in the works of Shakespeare, reflected a broader cultural awakening. Literacy increased, music spread through both printed scores and oral traditions, and festivals combined old customs with new influences. The cultural landscape became richer and more accessible to a wider segment of the population, not just the aristocracy. Religious life also underwent massive changes that filtered into everyday habits. The English Reformation, sparked under Henry VIII and solidified under Elizabeth I, reoriented the spiritual lives of the people. Church services changed language and form, monasteries were dissolved, holidays and rituals were altered or abolished. These reforms meant that even the most remote peasant felt the ripple effects of Tudor innovation. People's relationships with religion, authority, and community were reshaped by policies and ideas set in motion by the monarchy. Perhaps one of the most enduring legacies of the Tudor period was the sense that change was possible and even desirable. Whether in navigation, printing, military power, or daily life, the Tudors fostered a culture in which innovation was increasingly seen not as a threat to tradition, but as a means of advancement. This openness to new tools, ideas, and methods became a hallmark of English identity and would be crucial in the scientific and industrial revolutions to come. The Tudor period was not simply an age of kings and courts, but a time of profound transformation in the daily experience of life in England. Shipbuilding and navigation opened new worlds, both literally and metaphorically. Printing democratized knowledge and reshaped communication. Gunpowder revolutionized warfare and state power. And all of these innovations reverberated through homes, markets, churches, and schools, altering the patterns of ordinary existence. The Tudors' true legacy lies not only in their political feats but in their role as catalysts for a more connected, informed, and dynamic society, one that was beginning to resemble the modern world. The Tudor period, spanning from the late 15th to the early 17th century, is often remembered for its colorful monarchs, religious upheavals, and grand political machinations. Yet beyond the throne rooms and battlefields, the Tudors cultivated something far more enduring, a legacy of curiosity. It was a time when boundaries intellectual, geographical, scientific, and social were being tested and redrawn. A new attitude toward the world emerged, driven by a restless desire to understand, explore, and innovate. This spirit of inquiry was not limited to the court or the elite. It gradually permeated society, laying the groundwork for the modern scientific age. Today, centuries after the Tudor dynasty came to an end, their curiosity continues to influence our world in countless ways. The Tudor embrace of exploration, both literal and intellectual, signaled a major shift from medieval worldviews to something approaching modern thinking. Their world was still deeply tied to religion and tradition, but it also became one that increasingly valued observation, experimentation, and empirical knowledge. At the heart of this cultural transition were the seeds of what would become the scientific method, a reliance on evidence over authority, on experience over assumption. This philosophical shift began subtly but gained momentum as thinkers, artists, sailors, and scientists began asking new questions and developing tools to find the answers. One of the most prominent examples of this burgeoning curiosity was the rise of empirical science. Figures like William Gilbert and Francis Bacon were instrumental in forming the intellectual scaffolding that would support centuries of discovery. Gilbert's work on magnetism, for instance, did more than improve navigation. It revolutionized how people thought about forces in the natural world. He insisted on experiments, observations, and logical conclusions, a radical departure from relying solely on ancient texts. Francis Bacon, meanwhile, laid down the philosophical foundation of modern science by advocating for inductive reasoning. His Novum Organum argued that knowledge should be built from observable facts rather than assumed truths, challenging scholars to adopt a more rigorous, methodical approach to understanding the world. The monarchy, too, played a role in fostering this spirit. Although they were often more politically than scientifically motivated, the Tudors understood the value of knowledge. Henry VII and Henry VIII invested in navigation and cartography not merely for curiosity's sake but to expand trade and influence. Elizabeth I, in particular, recognized the power of patronage. Her support for explorers and scholars helped seed the environment in which innovation could flourish. This wasn't a golden age of science as we now know it, but it was a golden age of questioning, of daring to ask how things worked and why. One of the clearest manifestations of Tudor curiosity was in their commitment to exploration. English sailors ventured further than ever before, mapping coastlines, discovering trade routes, and opening England to the wider world. These journeys required not only courage but new knowledge in astronomy, mathematics, and geography. The pursuit of discovery was not always altruistic. Economic and imperial ambitions often lay at the core, but it undeniably expanded the boundaries of what was known. These expeditions fed a growing appetite for information and contributed to a more interconnected worldview. The idea that one could explore not only new lands but also new ideas was deeply transformative and persists today. The printing revolution, which gained real momentum in the Tudor era, further accelerated this transformation. The ability to share ideas widely and quickly broke down barriers that had kept knowledge confined to monastic and aristocratic circles. Books on science, navigation, philosophy, and health became more common, creating a more informed public and stimulating debate. This explosion of information allowed curiosity to spread beyond the scholar's study or the sailor's map room. Tradesmen, students, and even housewives began to engage with printed material, leading to a democratization of learning that forms the bedrock of modern education systems. The Tudor period also saw early movements toward formal institutions of knowledge. Although the Royal Society would not be officially founded until after the Tudor reign, its roots lie in the ethos cultivated during this era. The Tudor fascination with nature, mechanics, and medicine created the intellectual momentum that would propel future scientists into systematic research. Gardens, apothecaries, anatomical studies, and mechanical inventions were part of a wider inquiry into the laws that governed the world. These pursuits often blended science with art and spirituality, but they reflected a clear shift toward observation, classification, and understanding principles that remain essential in science today. Importantly, the Tudor legacy of curiosity was not confined to elite circles. Artisans and craftsmen, inspired by changing times, began to innovate in ways that reshaped daily life. Advances in metallurgy, engineering, and construction improved tools and infrastructure. Millers, weavers, and printers adapted new techniques and technologies, contributing to a quiet revolution in productivity and precision. While these changes might seem modest compared to philosophical breakthroughs, they represented the practical application of curiosity, the transformation of abstract ideas into tangible improvements. The influence of the Tudor spirit is evident in the way modern society approaches challenges. Scientific institutions around the world still operate according to principles that were first systematized in Tudor England: inquiry, experimentation, documentation, and peer review. Modern medicine, engineering, and even computing owe a philosophical debt to the early insistence that observation and reasoning must trump superstition and dogma. Though the tools have evolved dramatically, the fundamental drive to understand and improve the world can be traced back to the Tudor age. This legacy is not merely historical, it is a living influence. Today's researchers, inventors, and educators continue to be inspired by the Tudor tradition of intellectual boldness. Their willingness to defy convention and imagine new possibilities is a model for anyone working in science, education, or the arts. Whether it's a biomedical engineer developing prosthetic limbs, a climate scientist analyzing data to combat global warming, or a schoolteacher encouraging students to question and explore, the same spirit that moved Tudor explorers to sail uncharted waters continues to guide innovation. Furthermore, the Tudor example reminds us that curiosity is not a luxury but a necessity. In a world facing complex challenges, climate change, technological disruption, pandemics, and social inequality, the ability to ask questions, test ideas, and adapt solutions is more important than ever. The Tudor period teaches us that progress comes not from accepting the world as it is, but from imagining what it could be. Their story underscores the importance of nurturing curiosity in education, public policy, and cultural life. Engaging with the Tudor legacy, then, is not about mere nostalgia. It is about recognizing a shared heritage of curiosity and innovation and continuing that tradition with intention and purpose. Museums, books, documentaries, and historical tours help us understand the past, but the real value of Tudor history lies in how it can inspire future generations. Their example invites us to look beyond the known, to question assumptions, and to remain open to the unknown. There is also a personal dimension to this legacy. Curiosity is not confined to laboratories or universities. It lives in everyday encounters with the world. Every child who asks why the sky is blue, every adult who learns a new skill, every community that comes together to solve a problem is participating in the same tradition that began centuries ago. The Tudor age reminds us that the thirst for knowledge is deeply human and that the smallest questions can lead to the greatest discoveries. Education plays a crucial role in keeping this legacy alive. Schools and teachers must foster environments where questioning is encouraged and failure is seen as part of the learning process. Just as the Tudors ventured into unknown seas and untested ideas, students should be empowered to explore, experiment, and express. Curriculum should reflect not only the content of Tudor discoveries but the mindset that made them possible. That means emphasizing critical thinking, creativity, and resilience skills as vital today as they were in the 16th century. Modern technology offers powerful tools to extend this legacy. Digital archives, interactive simulations, and online courses can make Tudor innovations accessible to a global audience. Virtual reality can bring historical settings to life, allowing learners to experience the past in immersive ways. These tools not only teach history but embody the spirit of innovation that defined the era. They allow users to explore history not as a set of dates and names but as a living, breathing story of human ingenuity. Civic institutions also have a role to play. Public libraries, science centers, and cultural organizations can help bridge the gap between past and present by hosting exhibits, talks, and workshops that connect Tudor breakthroughs to contemporary issues. A discussion about Tudor navigation, for instance, can lead to conversations about space exploration. A demonstration of printing technology can segue into debates about digital misinformation. In these ways, the past becomes a platform for dialogue and development, not just remembrance. In an increasingly divided and distracted world, the Tudor commitment to exploration and inquiry offers a unifying principle. It tells us that progress is possible when we dare to think differently, collaborate across disciplines, and remain humble in the face of complexity. Their curiosity gave birth to new worlds, both real and intellectual. Our responsibility is to continue exploring new technologies, new ideas, and new ways of living together. This is not merely a historical imperative but a personal one. Each person has the capacity to question, learn, and contribute. Whether you're a student choosing a research topic, a scientist seeking a breakthrough, or simply someone curious about how things work, you are participating in a tradition that stretches back to the Tudors and beyond. Curiosity is a force that drives innovation, nurtures empathy, and fosters resilience. Looking forward, we must honor the Tudor legacy not by preserving it in amber, but by activating it in our lives. Ask questions. Read widely. Engage deeply. Let the curiosity that transformed a small island kingdom into a world power guide your own journey of discovery. The tools may have changed, but the spirit remains. It whispers from old maps and weathered manuscripts, from the worn steps of observatories and the echoes of ancient shipyards. Explore, learn, create. In doing so, we don't just remember the Tudors, we become part of their ongoing story. We carry forward their legacy of curiosity, ensuring that the thirst for knowledge continues to shape a better, more informed, and more connected world. The future, like the past, belongs to the curious. As we reach the culmination of this deep exploration into the legacy of the Tudors, it becomes clear that their impact goes far beyond crowns and coronations, politics and personalities. Their true power lay not only in their governance but in the intellectual momentum they helped generate, a forward-thinking spirit of inquiry and invention that continues to ripple through time. The Tudor era, for all its drama and pageantry, proved to be a fertile epoch for transformation, one that nurtured a renaissance of knowledge, a restructuring of the way society thought, and a firm challenge to inherited limitations. In this, they gifted us a legacy not only of historical significance but of enduring relevance. From the dawn of Henry VII's reign in the late 15th century to the final years of Elizabeth I's rule in the early 17th century, England was a land in flux. Economically, socially, and intellectually, the nation was repositioning itself within a rapidly expanding global and ideological framework. It was a time of voyages and discoveries, of scientific breakthroughs and artistic achievements. However, underpinning all of this outward activity was something more intimate and personal: the stirring of curiosity. This was an age where to question was no longer an act of heresy or defiance, it became a mark of engagement with the world. The Tudors were, in many respects, champions of this evolution, even when they were not always fully aware of the revolutions they were enabling. The royal court itself became a space where ideas could mingle, though often under the protective guise of practical utility. Science was welcomed when it could serve the needs of the state: navigation for imperial ambitions, medicine for longevity and stability, and technology for warfare. Yet even within this practical framework, the doors were opened for individuals, visionaries, thinkers, artisans who would push beyond mere functionality into the realm of discovery for its own sake. William Gilbert's work on magnetism may have been rooted in improving navigation, but it unlocked a new way of understanding natural forces. Francis Bacon's philosophy was deeply intertwined with governance, yet it laid the groundwork for a whole new way of structuring knowledge itself. This period also showed that intellectual breakthroughs did not occur in isolation. Progress was not the sole property of elite scholars or royal patrons. In towns and villages, among artisans and apprentices, innovation took root in quieter, subtler ways. Improved tools, better building techniques, evolving standards of hygiene, and more effective methods of communication all contributed to an upward curve in the standard of living and understanding. The printing press spread knowledge at an unprecedented rate, breaking down the traditional walls between those who held information and those who sought it. The democratization of knowledge, even in its infancy, reshaped the cultural DNA of England. That democratization is still in process today and still critically important. Perhaps most compelling about the Tudor legacy is its duality. It was both a mirror and a lens. It reflected the desires, fears, and ambitions of a kingdom emerging from medieval shadows, but it also helped frame the way forward. Its thinkers dared to step beyond inherited wisdom. Its scientists dared to challenge assumptions. Its navigators dared to believe there were new shores to be found. They charted maps not only of the globe but of human understanding, of medicine, of society, and of the cosmos itself. And by doing so, they redefined what it meant to be a seeker of truth. One of the most powerful lessons we can draw from the Tudor period is that curiosity, when nurtured, becomes transformative. It transforms how we view the world, how we solve problems, and how we relate to one another. The Tudor era was not without its contradictions. It was often brutal, hierarchical, and deeply unjust. Yet amid these limitations, it produced a generation of minds that began to see the world as a puzzle to be solved rather than a fate to be accepted. It showed that even in an age of kings and queens, revolutions of thought could quietly unfold in universities, workshops, gardens, and libraries. This notion carries profound implications for our own time. We live in an age defined by rapid change, where information is more accessible than ever before and technology is reshaping every aspect of life. And yet, the challenges we face, climate change, inequality, misinformation, disease, demand not only tools and data but the same spirit that defined the Tudor Renaissance: curiosity, courage, and collaboration. The lessons of the past are not relics, they are roadmaps. Take, for example, the evolution of scientific methodology. Bacon's call for inductive reasoning remains a cornerstone of how we approach research today. His work underpins everything from drug development to artificial intelligence. Similarly, Gilbert's commitment to observation over dogma prefigures the kind of critical thinking we now teach in schools and universities. These were not merely men of their time, they were architects of a mindset that transcends time. Or consider the practical innovations in navigation, shipbuilding, and printing. These technological advancements enabled a level of global connectivity that we now take for granted. The Tudor legacy in these areas was not only about the tools themselves but about the mindset they encouraged. One that was open to exchange, exploration, and engagement with new perspectives. This is especially relevant today, in an interconnected world where isolation is no longer feasible and collaboration is a necessity. Even in areas such as health and hygiene, the Tudor period laid important foundations. While their understanding of the human body was rudimentary by modern standards, their willingness to experiment, to build hospitals, and to improve surgical practices marked the beginning of a shift toward modern medicine. That same drive to understand and heal is evident in our modern response to public health crises, from vaccines to sanitation to global health cooperation. We continue their journey, not as a finished project, but as a work in progress. Moreover, the Tudor story offers a valuable reminder of the relationship between power and knowledge. Though their reign was marked by strict control and at times ruthless enforcement of authority, the most enduring power they wielded was the kind that cannot be enforced: the power to inspire curiosity. This is perhaps the most democratic form of influence. Once someone begins to question, to seek, to learn, they are no longer merely a subject, they become a participant in shaping their world. The Tudors may have worn crowns, but their true legacy was to pass the torch of inquiry to the people. It is for this reason that engaging with the Tudor legacy is not an exercise in nostalgia, but in empowerment. Their story challenges us to think, to act, to explore. It encourages educators to cultivate curiosity in classrooms, scientists to pursue questions with integrity, and citizens to remain informed and involved. It tells artists and writers that beauty and truth are worth seeking. It tells policymakers that history matters. It tells each of us that the future is not something we inherit passively, it is something we build actively. In this light, The Tudor era serves as a bridge between the medieval world and the modern one, a bridge not just of time but of values. It connects faith and reason, tradition and innovation, authority and liberty. And it invites us to walk that bridge, to draw strength from the past not as an anchor but as a compass. Their triumphs and failures alike are instructive. They remind us that progress is not linear, that knowledge is hard-won, and that curiosity is the spark that keeps the flame of civilization alive. So what do we do with this legacy? We honor it not through blind admiration but through active participation. We ask questions about the past, about the present, about what is possible. We explore, not only the farthest reaches of space or the deepest corners of the ocean but the complexities of our own minds and societies. We innovate, not only for profit or power but for the betterment of all. And we educate, ensuring that future generations inherit not only the fruits of Tudor curiosity but the roots that made it possible. Let this be a call to action. Whether you are a student, a teacher, a parent, a scientist, a policymaker, or simply someone with a passion for understanding, the legacy of the Tudors is yours to carry forward. Read their books. Study their thinkers. Visit the places they touched. But more importantly, continue their work. Challenge assumptions. Seek evidence. Welcome the unknown. Because, in the end, the most profound tribute we can offer to the Tudors is not in preserving their monuments or repeating their names. It is in echoing their questions, extending their explorations, and pushing beyond the horizons they reached. Their story is not over. It is ours to continue. And in doing so, we ensure that their legacy, one of curiosity, resilience, and innovation, lives on, not only in history books but in the fabric of our daily lives, in the dreams we dare to dream, and in the discoveries yet to come.